I know there is only one love, one life, one energy, one spirit, one truth. One in which I exist, of which I am, of which each of us is. We are not separate from this one. We are it in expression. Every day, every breath, every moment, we are this. We are this good. We are this love. We are this joy, this wisdom. We are this. And I also know within myself those places that may not be quite resoundingly good. In my heart, they are still one of the one. My work, my joy, my pleasure is to be love at all times, is to be grace at all times, is to be open and learning all the time. Learning how to see and experience life as the eyes of spirit. I am grateful for this community that echoes and reflects back to me the love, the good, the wisdom, the grace that I know exists. I choose to surround myself with this community and the greater community, always knowing and always seeing that good. Open to possibilities of more good at any point, at all points. I am grateful for this community today, for the words, the wisdom, and the love with Reverend David's talk will give us, for the music that lifts the hearts, for the hugs, the handshakes, the nods, the smiles. This is all God. This is all universe, spirit, source, call it what you will. This is what good looks like. This is how good feels. And I know as I dwell in that awareness and embrace that truth, whether I am in the room or watching the room in the virtual world, it's still true. We are all the face of God. I am grateful for this knowing, for this truth, indelibly etched on my heart. So I let my words go into this law, and that law says, yes, ma'am, how high? How high shall I jump today? And I say, as high as I can, as high as you can. Vibrating as high as possible with that love and joy. Thank you, Spirit. And so it is. Please take 2 minutes in quiet contemplation. And we will return to the space with music.
So this whole year, and I see a number of new faces. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for having the courage to check us out. Um, well, I mean that because I mean the first time I ever went to a Center for Spiritual Living, which back in those days was called the Church of Religious Science. I had grown up Catholic, and by the time I was 18 and out of Catholic high school, I was like, I'm never going to a church ever, ever, ever again, you know. And so it took me, 20-ish years, and finally a friend suggested that I check out this Science Mind thing. I was having a few interesting moments in my life, and so I knew I needed to do something, and so I kind of went in like this, you know. Fortunately, the minister included the previous night Star Trek: The Next Generation in her talk, which I was kind of a fan of, and it's like, okay, this is kind of cool. This is not what I heard in Catholic Church, and I don't think there was any whole Bible quotes or anything like that. So I survived, and now I are a minister. What can I say? So this whole year we've been looking at the idea of living out loud. You know, I heard from a couple of people who over the last few weeks who were new who said, your place is so joyful. You know, and it's just like, I'm not used to that. You know, and so that's one of the qualities, joy is one of the qualities of the divine. You know, playfulness is one of the qualities of the divine. And so we incorporate that. I love to incorporate that. So we're living out loud. And this month we're going to be looking at the idea of speaking truth to circumstances. And it's a little play on the idea of speaking truth to power, which I'll talk about in a minute. But our talk title today is Monsters, Inc. How many of you have seen that movie? And many of you haven't. That's good. That's fine. Monsters, Inc. So our monthly theme is a reframe of the phrase speaking truth to power. And since we know that Spirit, the infinite presence, is the only power there is, and Spirit lives in truth, as truth, there's no need to speak truth to the infinite power, right? It already is. What people really mean is speaking truth to control, or people or circumstances that seem to control us. But circumstances are never truth. They're just simply effects of thoughts and choices that are often made unconsciously, based on old beliefs rooted in fear. And as we begin to dismantle the hold that these controlling people and circumstances have on us, or appear to have on us, by looking these seeming monsters in the face and discovering that, like the Disney movie of the same name, the monsters aren't so scary and may even be helpful. Take that in. In the movie, the premise is that the monsters go scare little children. And there's a world that they live in, and that world is powered by screams of fear from little children. And during the course of the movie, some little girl decides that she's not scared of the monsters. And not only that, but she somehow gets herself into the monsters' world. Oh my God, that's not supposed to happen. She even touches them, which is not supposed to happen, and gives them a hug because the big blue furry guy that's supposed to scare everybody, she sees him as a big blue teddy bear. Kitty. And Kitty, yes, and hugs him. That was her name for him, is Kitty. And over time, they discover that laughter, the sound of laughter of children, is actually more powerful than the screams of fear. And it's a wonderful lesson for us that our joy is more powerful than our fear. So we begin by first looking at the word power. And that word can cause strong reactions in people, but if we remember that the only true power is Spirit, the only true power is this infinite presence, this infinite divine, and that it's not a power over, but a power to create. What we've been conditioned to think of as power is really control. As we've explored before, we can believe we are separate from life and that life isn't safe, which triggers fear, and we compensate for that fear by trying to control life all around us. None of you have done that, but you know people. Okay? And of course, it's impossible to control all of life around us, yes? But that doesn't stop us from trying, does it? No. So when we understand that people with a high need for control are really scared children underneath that surface, we penetrate the surface and we see their hearts, and they become less monstrous and more human. And so as we pull back the curtain, the smoke and mirrors, and see the little man behind the curtain, for those of you who are familiar with The Wizard of Oz, we see the lonely, frightened people who've forgotten that they're spirit and form. How many of us have forgotten that we are spirit and form at some point in our lives? Yeah. So it doesn't mean we don't stop them from doing hurtful things, but it shifts our perception from seeing a monstrous enemy to seeing frightened children who are like us, because we've all been frightened children, even as adults at times, which allows us to move into compassion, which in turn allows us to recenter in the truth of remembering that infinite presence is the only real power, and that we are all and always one with this infinite presence. Ernest Holmes says, "One alone in consciousness with the infinite is a complete majority." Take that in for a moment. One alone in consciousness with the infinite is a complete majority. The anthropologist Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So in our minds, we give away our power. We let ourselves be hypnotized into believing that certain people or organizations are more powerful than we are. Yet in truth, no one is more or less powerful than anybody else. It's only by forgetting the truth of our oneness with Spirit and our forgetting the truth of our oneness with each other that we move into fear and the experiences of either controlling or being controlled. So when we allow Ernest's recommendation that one alone, and I want to emphasize the in consciousness with the infinite. So it's not just me by myself, but I'm in consciousness, I'm in alignment with that infinite presence, that infinite power. When we practice that, we feel ourselves in alignment with that. And so what is called for is a shift in consciousness, a shift from misperceiving control as power, a shift away from believing that we're powerless, and a shift in believing that we can even give our power away and know instead the truth that we are infinitely powerful. Breathe that in for a moment. Say that with me. I am infinitely powerful. Because we're connected with and one of an infinite expression, an infinite consciousness, and infinite power. And remember, the power is not power over, it's a power just to create, to do. So we're one of that. We're no less or greater than anyone else. We're just more or less awake or aware. And so as we anchor ever more deeply into that knowing, into really truly knowing that, we can look so-called monsters in the face and say, "Boo, I'm not afraid of you." And the controlling monsters and the seemingly insurmountable circumstances are not what we call first cause. First cause is that where everything starts, and everything starts ultimately in the divine presence, in the divine mind. First cause is that originating source from which everything else flows. When we stop being deceived by effects, which is what the screen out here is just effects in consciousness. The word circumstance literally means stand around, that which is standing around us, and we are generating that which is standing around us from our own either individual or collective consciousness. But we tend to try to do battle with that out there, not realizing that it's coming from in here. It's like trying to slay the villain on the movie screen rather than change the film that's being shown. Yes? So when we stop being deceived by effects, by smoke and mirrors of circumstances, or people trying to desperately control life, and bring our attention back to that infinite beingness, when we stop telling our God how big our problems are and tell our problems how big our God is, big difference, we open to the flow of infinite knowledge, infinite wisdom, infinite ideas, and real power, and we remember that we are that power in form and use that power to create greater good, greater love, greater joy, greater harmony, greater health, which is the nature of the infinite. We use that power to recreate the infinite, and thus creating what we like to call heaven on earth, or heaven as earth. Heaven not being someplace up in the sky, but a consciousness. You know, the story of the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and their eventually settling into the promised land is a story of listening to infinite wisdom in the midst of cries of despair, endless complaining. If you ever read the story, endless complaining, and challenging desperate circumstances. In this hero's journey, like many others, it shows the power of listening to that power within. Moses listened to that. A few of his allies in there listened to that power within. And it also demonstrates the consequences of not listening to that power. Another place where we've experienced the listening and that vision is something that we celebrate on Tuesday, which is the Declaration of the Independence of the United States, where it starts off with, we hold these truths. It doesn't start off, but the second paragraph is, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, we'll talk about that in a minute, are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator, turning to that Spirit, endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, easy for you to say, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you know, that's a vision statement that, like many vision statements, at the time the people who wrote it had a limited idea. Hi, Roger. At the time, the people who wrote it had a limited idea of what they meant by all men, right? But if we understand that at the time the word men meant all of humanity, was often used in that context, even if they were only thinking of white, landed, male, landowners. But the vision itself, all are created equal, and all have the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that vision has grown and expanded beyond the original thought of it, the original limited version of it, and it continues to expand in this country. And it continues to expand in the world because it was inspiration for so many other countries to say, hey, wait a minute, we're tired of being oppressed and under the thumb of various and sundry empires. So once we are alone in consciousness with the infinite, we are tapped into that greater power and wisdom. We may not know the how of creating a better world, but that's not ours to know. See, when they signed that Declaration of Independence, they didn't know what all was going to be involved. And many of them knew that there was a war that had already started, and if they lost the war, they would all be strung up as traitors to the British Empire. It's like signing that is like, okay, we're either going to live or we're going to die, one of the two. So we may not know the how, but that's not ours to know. Ours is to know the what. What is it that I want to create? What is the promised land? What is the Holy Grail? What is the freedom from the darkness of Lord Voldemort? What is the getting home if you're Dorothy or Ulysses? As we know the what, and sometimes it's just a feeling, just a sense. We don't have the whole picture, but we at least have an idea of the direction and the feel for it. As we become aware of that true call and become willing to align with a power greater than ourselves, all that has seemed to stand in our way begins to start to fade away, falls away, because those monsters, those circumstances are just effects of old beliefs. They are not, capital R, real. There's a story in the Hebrew Bible of a king who was, the king of the Israelites, who was put in a hard circumstance. Israel was on a little peninsula, the Palestinian peninsula, that was between all the Persian countries that would rise up in power and Egypt, which was the other superpower in the region. And so the way that they would deal with this was they wanted to conquer each other. Egypt wanted to conquer Persia, Persia wanted to conquer Egypt, and it was sort of like the big heavyweights would go have a battle, and guess where they had the battle? This little peninsula right in the middle of it all, right? And so that's where they went for it. And so there was one point in time where the king of Israel was being given an ultimatum that the Assyrians, coming out of the Persian Gulf, or Persian area, were saying, okay, you either align with us or we will destroy you. And the Egyptians were saying, okay, you either align with us or we'll destroy you. Anybody ever been between a rock and a hard place? Right? Where it seems like there is no win, there's no way out. And so the king brought all his consultants in and wise men in and tried to figure it out and tried to figure it out and tried to figure it out. And after a long time of days of trying to figure it out, finally took the paperwork that they had, went down to the temple one evening, dismissed all his wise men, went down to the temple, placed it on the altar, and looked up and said, God, we have done everything we know how. This is yours. I love that process, by the way. I use that process in my life when I'm stuck. It's like, God, this is yours. What happened was, a week later, the king of the general who was leading the Assyrians, who was the son of the king died, got sick and died, and the son had to go back to defend the homeland with the army. And the whole thing got avoided. The Revolutionary War, we lost many of the battles in there. We didn't militarily conquer the British Army. All we did was hang around and be obnoxious enough long enough that they finally got tired of spending money and troops all the way over here, and France declared war on them, and Spain was about to declare war on them, and so all of a sudden they got to protect their home front too. And you're not going to do that much of a battle on that many fronts. And people began to question, why are we sending all these troops and spending all this money trying to keep the colonies? Let them go. Nobody knew that when it started off. Often our first response to wounding or outrageous circumstances is fight, flight, or freeze. But if we truly want to create real change, we must unwind from that conditioned response and practice a fourth option, and that is going within. Not as in hiding, but turning to an infinite power to create something truly new. Not just rearranging the players on the board, but to create something truly new. We all really know what is life enhancing. And as people committed to creating a world that works for all, we must take a stand to listen within and to follow and live that guidance. We have to take a stand and no longer fight with the flickering lights out there on the mental screen, which is all circumstances are, but truly changing the source of what is being projected out onto that screen. Quantum physicist Max Planck said, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. If you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And the Greek philosopher Plotinus said, I do not argue. In other words, I don't fight. I don't get into it. I do not argue. I contemplate. And as I contemplate, I let fall the seeds of thought into the mirror of mind, which then becomes the mirror of matter. Isn't that beautiful? I contemplate what I want. I don't fight with stuff. I contemplate what I want. And as I do that, I let fall the seeds from my mind, which then become the seeds of matter. That which seems like monsters, people, organizations, or circumstances, are not as real as they appear. And when looked at through the mind of the infinite, it's just smoke and mirrors. And like monsters, they can make a lot of noise, right? They can huff and they can puff and they can even blow down a house or two. But a house built on the solid foundation of spiritual truth cannot be blown down by bullies. And that doesn't mean that the form might go, but the real substance of the eternal life never dies. Thus, truth, always seeking embodiment, can never be blown down. And we've seen that if we watch history over time. Various and sundry conquerors will conquer something, but eventually it comes back again, yes? Because that life energy can never be really, truly defeated. We don't have to argue or fight. Every person is our family member. Ernest Holmes says, the practitioner does not fight evil, they know there is no evil. And And Brian McLaren said, that person you call your enemy, that person is part of your family, part of your species, part of your story, part of your kind. Breathe. In the Torah, Moses, who performs amazing wonders, is called the meekest of men. In that context, the meekest is one who puts aside his own doubts and fears to listen to Spirit, to listen to greater possibilities than he could have ever imagined. And in doing so, he led the Israelites from captivity, and we're all in captivity when we let people and circumstances push us around. He led them from that to true freedom. When we turn to truth in humility, in meekness, when we turn to that power within, we will speak truth to circumstances, and the monsters will transform. I'm going to close with a quote from Ernest Holmes, who said, oh, excuse me, I do have a spiritual practice to do here first. So this week, I invite you to identify a monster in your life. Yes. Identify a monster in your life. It could be close and personal, or it could be a world situation. Spend time visioning with the questions, what is Spirit's highest idea or view here? And then what is mine to become? And what is mine to release? Follow the guidance that arises to create a more life-enhancing experience for yourself and others. Are we willing to do that this week? That was really enthusiastic. Are we willing to face our monsters this week? Because I don't know about you, but I'm tired of being pushed around by monsters. Especially when I remember that I'm infinite power in form, and that they're nothing greater or lesser than I am. Facing the monster is often, yes, just facing the monster is oftentimes the monster. So Ernest Holmes, for our final quote, said, intuitively we sense that every person in their native state is some part or manifestation of this eternal principle, and that the entire problem of limitation, evil, suffering, and uncertainty is the result of ignorance. It's the result of us not being aware of who and what we really are. So we have an affirmation. You say this with me. I align with true power and let her rip. I align with true power and let her rip. So it is. Look around at the faces of the divine. Remember that your face is one of those. And take a breath. I go within and remember, one alone in consciousness with the infinite is a majority. And knowing that each of us is the infinite in form, the infinite individualized, and that we are here to be that infinite presence of light, of love, of life energy, of power, of peace, of beauty and joy in form. I know that each of us says yes to greater and greater expressions of that in our lives, whatever that looks like in our own individual lives. Because Spirit chose to show up as all of us, the whole bunch of us. And so it is unique for each of us. I know that this week we notice what our monsters may have been, and we face them down. Give them a hug. Call them Kitty if we need to, whatever it is. We remember that we are greater. And I'm grateful that we know this as our truth. We let it infuse our lives and bless all of us, and then bless the world out from us. And so we do, and so it is.